the newsagents.
You know it, you feel it. These guys are creepy, and yes, just weird as hell. That's what you see. That's what you see.
That is the folksy, charming, affable, joyful Tim Walz. Kamala Harris's pick to be her vice presidential running mate. And last night in Philadelphia, it was like a revivalist rally. The Democratic Party had got its mojo back, and there was a sense of exuberance in a packed arena. One commentator has said the Democratic Party has gone from a calamitous episode of Veep to the feel-good of Ted Lasso. Can it last? Welcome to the Newsagents. It's John.
And it's Lewis in Blackpool.
And my God, if you want to do a compare and contrast of the Democratic Party from 3 weeks ago and the Democratic Party last night, when Kamala Harris introduced Tim Walz, her running mate, to this ecstatic audience in Philadelphia, it is chalk and cheese. The Democrats think they are back in the race. They think they have taken the fight to Trump, and they think, again, that they can win. None of those things was true 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, and you might be sat there wondering, well, who the hell is this guy? I've never heard of him. And to be honest, like, you wouldn't be alone in that, like we were saying at the very tail end of the show yesterday. I mean, Tim Walz has, until recently, been a relatively unknown governor or unknown name in kind of national political circles in the US, until literally kind of a fortnight ago. He's the governor of Minnesota, used to be in the House. He was a House of he represented a rural district in Minnesota, and he had been ploughing quite a kind of liberal furrow in the state. You know, he had a lot of, with the aid of a Democratic state legislature, he got lots of things through, like paid parental leave and guaranteed abortion rights, and lots of things that really kind of get the pulse of your average Democrat quickening a little bit. And Obama had praised him and so on. But it was literally just a couple of weeks ago that he really exploded onto national consciousness in a very kind of 2024 way. Like, it was basically through a meme and a bit of kind of instant internet culture, where he managed to find the words, or more specifically, the word, to encapsulate the critique, a kind of light, but nonetheless kind of really, really effective, deadly critique of the Republican Party under its modern MAGA Trump guise, which is, he basically said, they're really weird. And that sounds like really kind of obvious and self-evident, and in a way, like, so what? But it sort of set the internet on fire, the way he said it, the way it sort of caught on. And it seemed to sum up something and kind of a vocabulary and type of wording that the Democrats, who had long instead gone the other way in terms of like being really dramatic, not necessarily, it might be true, but nonetheless, you're talking in the most kind of like extreme language, you know, they're fascists, Nazis, whatever it happened to be, racist. This seemed to just really, really catch on, not least because it's true. Trump and the rest of them are really odd and weird. And you heard at the top of the show how effective it was. And it was so wounding to Trump, like he didn't seem to have anywhere to go with it. And this apparently seems to have, along with his kind of folksy kind of charm and easy communication style, caught the attention of the Harris campaign, who are like a very, unlike, and this is another big difference with Biden, right? They're a very like digital first, online kind of group of people representing the generational change. Like we've seen in the last couple of weeks, types of internet and meme culture that like around the sort of brat thing and all of that kind of thing that, you know, and the coconut tree thing, which has gone all over online. And so you can kind of see how someone who has got this easy manner and a particular way of communicating that works with a digital audience and a younger Democrat base kind of really works. And it clearly has caught Harris's attention.
I think what is the impressive part of what Harris has done in picking him is that he appeals in terms of character, as you said, Lewis, folksy, affable, kind of hail fellow well met. He is very upper Midwestern. He is so much from where he hails. And if you travel in the Midwest in America, the people are really delightful. He worked on his farm. When he was old enough, he joined the National Guard. So he's a military veteran. He's an ace shot. He goes hunting at weekends. He is so ordinary Joe American. that will appeal to an awful lot of Americans who probably don't warm to a black lawyer from San Francisco, but this guy is a regular kind of middle America guy. And on policy terms, so you've got the character that appeals to kind of one demographic, and on policy terms, he is going to probably cement the younger vote who once upon a time would have gone for Bernie Sanders, but now think that he is a proper liberal, as you use that word yourself in the description of him. And so I think it is quite a clever pick. I mean, before they came on stage last night, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, we heard in Philadelphia from the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. My word, is he a brilliant orator?
Are you ready to do your part? Are you ready to form a more perfect union? Are you ready to build an America where no matter what you look like, where you come from, who you love or who you pray to, that this will be a place for you? And are you ready?
And I kind of initially, when I was just watching Shapiro and waiting for Waltz to come on, I was thinking, wow, she's really passed up someone brilliant in Shapiro. I'm not sure Josh Shapiro would have had the same appeal to those older, white, male, maybe Trump-leaning people who Waltz now has a chance of pulling back.
Yeah, I think this reveals kind of something about how Harris diagnoses American politics and thinks where it is and where it's going, right? Because Harris, in lots of ways, remains quite enigmatic, right? We've talked so much about, and this is a very American political thing, we've talked so much about what she represents and the generational shift and the fact, obviously, that she's a black woman, all that sort of stuff. We've actually talked in many ways far less about like what she thinks and where she thinks American politics is going. And I think this is revealing of it in a couple of ways, right? I think that this is a pick that is born of some confidence for how she feels and how the campaign feels this campaign is going to go. I think, the very fact that Waltz, he doesn't deliver a state, right? I mean, the great appeal of Shapiro, you mentioned, John, is that as a very, very popular governor of Pennsylvania, and given how narrow the race was for Biden in 2020 in Pennsylvania, how narrow it's going to be this time, how the Democrats cannot win, as we were saying yesterday, without Pennsylvania. There's no electoral maths, no electoral map that leads you to 270 electoral votes without it. You might think that all roads would lead to him. I think this probably reveals that they think that perhaps this election maybe won't be quite as close. And more importantly as well, at least that, if not that she feels that the premium in the way American politics works now is to get the base as excited and energized as possible. And that might not have happened with Shapiro, who I think in another political era, as recently as, say, 10 years ago or 15 years ago or whatever, would have represented the obvious pick, not just geographically, but politically as well, right? You're tacking to the center, you're reassuring kind of those older white voters that you're talking about, John. And no, Waltz is not going to repel any of those people, not least because of his Midwestern credentials and backgrounds. I think there's no doubt whatsoever that she is still sending a signal about the direction of politics, and that is in a more liberal, more progressive direction. And what that she decided, the premium bit, as Trump basically thinks, the premium now in American politics is to get your base as energized as possible, particularly how little time there is now between now and election day.
Well, I was in kind of Washington for the 2020 election. I was in New York when Hillary Clinton launched her campaign in 2016. And I was also, there in the States when Obama launched in 2008. I'm going to say that I haven't seen anything like the enthusiasm that there was last night since Obama. It wasn't there with Clinton. It wasn't there with Biden. It feels like it is back there. Now, whether it all fizzles out, I'm not saying that this is all a done deal and the Democrats, it's going to be plain sailing. I'm sure there are going to be strenuous efforts by the Republicans to define this as the most radical left-wing ticket that there has been in American history, and trying to portray Walz as this kind of, Bernie Sanders type figure, the progressive who they were hoping Kamala Harris would pick because it gives them the best chance of taking back the White House. All of those things, I'm sure, are true. But given where the Democrats were, to believe that they could be where they are now is just remarkable. given the state and the dysfunction that they were in when the Biden campaign was sinking into a quagmire. And I think the Republicans have some challenging questions about how they fight this. And I'm not sure they've kind of alighted on the right messages yet.
Well, I think there's no doubt about that, right? There's no doubt at all that Trump has been completely discombobulated and disoriented by the transition from Biden to Harris. And you can see he just can't quite realize, or at least quite hone yet, what his attack is. He sent this very plaintive kind of message on Truth Social last night, his social media kind of network, where he basically, he suggested that there was lots of talk that Biden might come back on the ticket, and that people, because Kamala's so left wing and everything.
Lewis,
yeah, well,
Lewis,
your dreams, mate. Like,
Lewis, you're not doing it justice, mate. I'm
go
sorry.
on, read it out.
I'm going to read it out. This is from Donald Trump, posted last night. What are the chances that crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of the US, whose presidency was unconstitutionally stolen from him by Kamala, deliberate misspelling, comma, Barack Hussein Obama, Hussein in capital letters, crazy Nancy Pelosi, shifty Adam Schiff, crying Chuck Schumer, and others on the lunatic left, crashes the Democrat National Convention and tries to take back the nomination, beginning with challenge me to another debate. He feels that he made a historically tragic mistake by handing over the US presidency, a coup to the people in the world he most hates, and he wants it back now. I mean,
that's
wow.
Nice and measured, then.
That's very, very measured and tamed and
a
restrained.
sober assessment from the 45th president.
Yeah, and so, he has clearly gone off on one. And the whole focus of the Trump campaign was meant to be, don't go off on one. Stick to the southern border. Stick to the economy. Stick to the stock market. Stick to the things where we can win. The kitchen table issues that average Americans are concerned about. And instead of which, he's going in for personality assaults. And a lot of senior Republicans are saying, we mustn't do this. If we stick to policy, we win. If it becomes personal playground insults, we lose.
But I think the what's happened in the last 3 weeks, and it is a sort of dizzying kind of volume of events when you consider how recent it was that Biden took that historic decision to step aside. I think there is something. One of the reasons that Trump is so discombobulated and the Republicans haven't managed to recover yet is it shows the extent to which, in the latter stages of the Biden presidency, because frankly of his complete inability to articulate anything, to articulate any political argument whatsoever, it shows the extent to which Trump and the Republicans had been playing the game on easy mode, right? Like, it really, you talked about the bully pulpit yesterday, John, that phrase that, we first associated, that was coined by Teddy Roosevelt, talking about the power of the American presidency and the American president to kind of command the debate and to set the kind of parameters of where the politics of the debate were going to be. And it's reminded me, I think, the extent to which, like, we've often talked about how good a president has Biden been. And we've talked, in a lot of ways, on the policy side, on the international side, on the kind of, on the showing, not telling bit, Biden has been very, very effective. But I think his inability, through his age, frankly, in the last 12 to 18 months, to use that bully pulpit reminds us how important the pulpit, the actual telling bit of the American presidency and any political job, and this would apply to Keir Starmer as well right now, is how important it is to be able to articulate a message. And what's happened to the Democrats in the last 3 weeks is, frankly, having a candidate who is articulate, who can speak in full sentences and can actually make a sustained political argument and critique of your opponents, it just shows how important that is, as self-evident as that is. It was almost like the Democrats, or at least the people around Biden, had forgotten that. You have to do both to be able to show and tell. And this might not last. It might just be a bit of a bounce from having someone who can finally do that. But the reason it's discombobulated Trump is they've got someone who is actually on the pitch and making arguments. And Walz will help her do that to some extent.
Well, I thought Walz last night did it really quite effectively, in the sense that, so much of American political debate is conducted in the most angry terms possible. And I think back to the debate between Biden and Trump in Cleveland, where they're shouting, "Shut up, man, you don't know what you know." It's all of that kind of, it's a fight breaking out in a pub, you felt, listening to them. And last night you had Tim Walz on the platform, kind of just gently, with a chuckle in his voice, lacerating Donald Trump. Have a listen to this.
Now, Donald Trump sees the world a little differently than us. First of all, he doesn't know the first thing about service. He doesn't have time for it because he's too busy serving himself. Again and again and again, Trump weakens our economy to strengthen his own hand. He mocks our laws. He sows chaos and division. And that's to say nothing of his record as president. He froze in the face of the COVID crisis. He drove our economy into the ground. And make no mistake, violent crime was up under Donald Trump. That's not even counting the crimes he committed.
You see the zinger of a punchline there, delivered with a smile on his face. It has the audience laughing. And I think that that is quite an effective way of dealing with Trump, not trading anger with anger, because we've seen that before and it just turns people off. And Biden getting just as angry with Trump as Trump was with Biden, it was just kind of ugly.
I mean, we should say, of course, I mean, it could well be that if this could, in the fullness of time, come to be seen as a tremendous mistake, right? Not because that Walz is going to, like J.D. Vance, potentially sort of implode or be a problematic candidate. No one can doubt, for a start, that he would fulfill the primary constitutional requirement of the job, that if the worst were to happen, he had to take over the job. He's clearly qualified to do it. He's got experience. But if the election is really, really close, if when we look back in 4 months' time and say that Kamala would have won if she'd taken Pennsylvania, for example, then we will say that this was a mistake, because Walz can't deliver a valuable state, like we said. You know, he's from Minnesota. It's literally, that is, apart from Washington, D.C., that is the one state that Democrats have had the longest winning streak in. They've won in every single presidential election, albeit sometimes narrowly, since 1972. Shapiro has a 61% favorable opinion rating in Pennsylvania. He outperformed Biden there in 2022 by 14 points. And he generally polls much better with white voters, older voters without a college degree. So it could be that if it all does come down to Pennsylvania by like a few thousand votes, that we look back and this could be one of the great what-ifs of American presidential history.
We will be back in a moment and we will be going to the Middle East.
To Lebanon now, where a barrage of more than 50 rockets was fired from the south into northern Israel.
Now to the Middle East next, where the number of countries urging its citizens to leave Lebanon continues to rise. That's amidst fears of an all-out regional conflict.
Last night, Hezbollah fired a barrage of 30 missiles into northern Israel. It came after the Israeli military killed a Hezbollah fighter on Saturday afternoon and struck civilian areas in southern Lebanon.
It's kind of one of those hackneyed phrases in journalism when you say tensions are rising. But on the Israel-Lebanon border, tensions, you can't imagine, rising much higher. Yes, there have been months of skirmishing, of Hezbollah firing rockets into northern Israel, Israel replying in kind. But then it intensified a couple of weeks ago when a Hezbollah rocket hit a group of kids playing football. 12 died. Israel struck back. Israel struck back, taking out a Hezbollah commander in Beirut, the Lebanese capital, at the same time as Israel also managed to assassinate the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, when he was in Tehran to see the swearing in of the new president. A huge embarrassment for Iran that happened. And now you're seeing the possibility of Iran and Hezbollah sort of almost acting in concert to attack Israel in retaliation, at the same time that you already have the kind of terrible situation still unfolding in Gaza, which have left so many thousands of Palestinians dead in the wake of the Hamas attack on October the 7th, which killed 1,200 Israelis and led to some 300 or so being taken hostage, and that hostage situation still unresolved. So every time you think it can't get much worse, it sort of gets a bit worse. To add to that, and the sense of precariousness, you have the UK military with 1,000 soldiers on standby, ready to perform an evacuation of British citizens from Lebanon. You don't do that unless you fear something terrible is about to unfold or could unfold. And you're seeing now, at the last minute, all sorts of diplomatic activity taking place from all sorts of actors in an attempt to limit what could happen, to prevent an all-out regional conflict with all the instability that would bring not just the region, but the world. Well, let's speak now to Tom Fletcher. He used to be our ambassador in Lebanon, watches it very closely, still in touch with all the key players. Do we know that an attack is going to happen? Because you don't normally put on 1,000 UK troops on standby for an evacuation of British nationals if you just think it's a vague possibility.
So we don't know for sure where or when an attack will come, actually from either side, from Hezbollah or from Israel, whoever chooses to escalate next. But I think you've got a combination of things. You've got that dialing up, that sense of eye for an eye that's going on at the moment. But you've also got these very overt, belligerent threats from both sides that they're ready to escalate. And I know from my experience, having been ambassador in Beirut, what you're looking at the whole time is those trigger warnings. You're always thinking, are there enough red lights flashing on the dashboard now that we should move to a crisis response? You never want to be too late on that response.
But we are at that stage now.
We are. And look, I spend my life telling people, go to Lebanon. It's an amazing place. The Lebanese people are extraordinary. The food, the culture, the landscape, the history, a wonderful, wonderful place. I'm sort of in love with that country. But now I'm saying to friends and others who are asking me, it's time to get out. Listen to these warnings. They're serious warnings. Get out on commercial means. Of course, there's a great plan in place. I talked to our ambassador last night, a brilliant ambassador, great team, lots of experience. We road test, I remember this very well. We road test this plan again and again and again. It must be the most tested UK Foreign Office crisis plan out there. But even with that in place, people should be getting on the plane now.
So when you hear, as we've heard today, Antony Blinken saying, right, Iran, Israel, do not escalate this, does that fall on deaf ears, or does it have an impact?
It does have an impact to an extent, but we've also seen the limits of US influence, the limits of US authority in the last, in the last months. They obviously have limited authority with the Iranians. They'll be using others to try to get that message through to Tehran. You would hope they would have that sort of influence with Tel Aviv and with the Netanyahu government. But we've seen a number of times now the Netanyahu government just bulldoze through those objections and get on with the conflict. That's obviously what we've seen in Gaza. The challenge at the moment is that the politics are very, very hard to manage. You've got in Lebanon itself a caretaker government. I spoke to the Lebanese prime minister a couple of days ago. You have no president, so you have no real restraint there on Hezbollah. And then on the Israeli side, you have a fracturing cabinet becoming more hardline. Many will think that Netanyahu wants to get on and do this exercise in Lebanon. Exercise is probably a kind of very gentle way of putting it, but to do what Israeli commanders described to me as mowing the lawn. It's a very chilling phrase, but to do what they've done in Gaza in southern Lebanon. And so it's a moment of real jeopardy, of real peril.
And the other thing that I've read, Tom, is that the Russians have been trying to lobby or persuade Tehran to moderate its approach. And I just wonder whether you buy into reports that actually, there are an awful lot of countries getting involved in trying to influence what happens, with Russia saying, look, if you're going to strike Israel, do not hit civilian targets. Make sure it is very precise and limited in scope what you seek to do.
Yeah, so I think there will be a lot of countries behind the scenes using the influence, using the channels that they have, and everyone has slightly different channels into the Middle East. The real challenge here is that wherever you stand on the wider politics, wherever you want this to end, surely we can all agree on the protection of civilians, Israeli civilians, Palestinian civilians, Lebanese civilians. And that's the message that has to go through very, very firmly on all those channels right now. Also, this sense, don't start what you can't finish. Don't escalate this in a way that leads to a crisis, to a conflagration that just gets out of everyone's control. There are a lot of channels in place, including between Israel and Hezbollah, which in the past have managed to find ways to de-escalate.
Well, if you spin back a few months to April, when Iran sent that volley of missiles, ballistic missiles and drones towards Israel, in response to Israel having killed Iranian commanders in a consul in Damascus, then you could see that it felt like this was, okay, you've done this to us, we're going to do this to you, we call it quits at the end of it. Our kind of dignity is in place. Why should we be more fearful now that won't work?
Well, you're right. I mean, with hindsight, that was a very terrifying moment, but with hindsight, you can see that those measures were quite carefully telegraphed in advance and then quite carefully choreographed so as not to have the devastating impact and that escalatory effect that they might have done. Maybe we're in the same scenario. Maybe everyone can agree that there'll be a bit of tit for tat, that the Iranians will choose a target that matches the losses that they've had. But things are really on a knife edge. It's a very, very risky strategy. And in the midst of all that, there is such danger of miscalculation. I still think that Hezbollah themselves don't want this conflict to escalate. They know the risks that lie ahead if they do. I think that the Israeli communities in northern Israel also don't want this to escalate because they understand the risks of that too. The danger is of misstep if people are playing this game of bluff and counter bluff and just push it too far.
So when Hezbollah fired that missile that killed the 12 kids playing football, and it should be said they were Druze, they were not Hebrew speaking, they were Arab speaking youngsters. Was that a miscalculation on their part?
So what I'm hearing from people on the ground, and I'm no longer reading the intelligence and reading the diplomatic reports and so on, but what I'm hearing from a lot of people on the ground is that was a mistake, that they didn't mean to hit that playground. Now, it doesn't excuse it because it clearly had horrifying effects. And for them to say, well, it's okay to kill one group of children, but not another group of children, doesn't really buy them much credibility. The danger is, if you've got this very, very dry tinder and you're throwing matches into it, then there will be civilian casualties. So I wouldn't excuse them at all, but they are signaling quite hard that was an accident, that wasn't something they intended to do.
And is there anything that can be done? I mean, you describe this tinder dry kind of brush kind of landscape where one match could set the whole thing off. Is there anything that can dampen it down now, where we are? What could make a difference?
Yes, there are several things. I mean, partly those messages, as you say, going from Washington, from London. David Lammy has been out there with John Healey. They had a very successful visit to the region last week. That all has an effect. Then the big one is making some sort of progress on this two-state solution, or at least providing that horizon that we can get back to. The Lebanese Prime Minister was very clear with me that was where this all ended. If we could get that conversation going again, it would reduce the tension on that Lebanon-Israel border. And then I think very practically, when I was the ambassador in Lebanon, we built these watchtowers along the Lebanon-Syria border. We did amazing work with the Lebanese army to stand up Lebanese state presence on that border. As a result, when Islamic State hit Lebanon, at that point when they were knocking over borders, they were repelled by the Lebanese army. I believe you could extend that project along the southern border of Lebanon. I believe the conditions are right now. I think Hezbollah would accept it as the price for avoiding a wider conflict. I think it would reassure Israel that the international community were doing something serious to provide them security on that border. And it would be a useful addition to the vital, vital UN role, which is there between those two parties. So there's something direct and practical you could do there to get the Lebanese state to take control of their own border.
Tom Fletcher, I'm grateful to you. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Before we go, I feel we've got to give an update on the riots, the trouble, the discontent, the awful scenes that we've witnessed in Britain over the past week, 10 days or so. There have been a number of court cases where people have been given custodial sentences for the part they've played in rioting, and that's from Plymouth up to Liverpool. And we know that the police, the authorities, the government is bracing itself for a uncomfortable and sweaty night tonight, with all sorts of protests apparently being planned.
Yeah, there's a suggestion from the Times today that the police and the government are bracing themselves for 100 different protests / riots / examples of disorder on Wednesday evening. And given that the weather has sustained pretty much in terms of the good weather, that would probably be, that probably isn't that unlikely. We were saying yesterday on yesterday's show that these Telegram channels have basically been disseminating around this sort of call to arms, literally, I suppose, call to instruction to assemble, often at immigration centres, solicitors that help immigrants, and so on. We could be looking back as to what unfolds tonight as a very, very dark day and evening indeed, and the police will absolutely be braced for it. And indeed, the suggestion is potentially for the first time, this could include London tonight.
Well, wherever you are, wherever you're listening to us, I hope you stay safe. I hope there is no trouble. I hope we're here tomorrow to talk about a night that was a non-event. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.